Good day, brothers and sisters. This is the other Paul, and welcome to once again another stream. And today, a very, very unique stream at that, where I will for once not be attacking Rome, but defending it. In fact, from a, shall we say, a very not so good display of Protestant apologetics. And I think, to be fair, I think from the kind of Protestant thinker that is presenting it, I think we can kind of clearly see why it wasn't exactly that good. But we'll be getting to that in just a second. Far out, everyone's in the chat now. Pog Warriors, super stoked, so true. Orthotrog, my buddy. Where is the anti-pope, the other Paul? You mean the Pope. You mean the Holy Father. Well, not even that. The God Emperor of mankind. Exactly what I am. Christian Mario, friend, likewise, my friend. Lovely to see you as usual. Adam, good to see you. Do I really need to watch this? Oh, you do. It's a good case study in what not to do as a Protestant. Friend. What up, Paul? What up, Paul? What up, Paul? What up, Christian Mario? What up, Christian, wholesome Nick Fuentes? John O'Cross, lovely to see you. Have me on to talk about egalitarian heretics some other day. 100%, I'm down for that, 100%. The other Paul, a Romanist, lol. Just playing the devil's advocate, the Pope's advocate, which is basically one and the same thing. That's what's happening today. Le Libertad Prot, exactly. That's what this is. And I think this isn't just oh well, he's a libertad, so I explained it. It's not just that. I genuinely believe there's interrelation with his liberal method as a liberal and with how he does his argument here on capturing Christianity. And so we're going to be getting to that in just a second. But first, let me pull up the Census Patronorum in celebration of my supporters. You legends are absolutely awesome. I updated it to include latest supporter, the Anabaptist, absolute legend. And thank you all for supporting me. It's super epic. This is helping me make an income, and this is going to be, I want to eventually make this a primary income. For now, by God's grace, I actually just recently got accepted for a casual work at a Christian bookstore that's near me that I go to quite frequently for resources, so it's pretty darn cool. So that's going to be a modest side income, but I'd love to have this develop as the primary income for my ministry as well. Yes, so that this can eventually be sustainable. And of course, as well, they are two technically separate incomes. The job one's going to be personal income. This one is technically business income, which I will occasionally draw from for personal expenses. But otherwise, they are distinct, and it'd be super epic for people to continue supporting me and to become new supporters in order to help me expand the ministry. I've just launched the new website, which involves custom domain and among other things, which has involved expenses from the business account, which meant you supporters here help make the new website possible, theotherpaul64.com. So thank you, absolute legends, for supporting me. And I do encourage anyone else who is currently either contributing to or actively serving at their church, who is financially stable and who wants to see my ministry grow, I highly encourage you to support me down in the link below in Subscribestar. Yes, I encourage you to do that. It'd be super epic, very helpful. And for everyone who is currently already supporting me, thank you so much. You get awesome benefits in the supporter tiers below, and I'm actually about to, or in the near-ish future, to launch a new highest tier, the Apostolos tier. Once I go live with options for tutoring, hourly tutoring, I'm going to launch the Apostolos tier, which is going to include 3 free hours of tutoring on the various topics that I am ready and able to teach per month. 3 free hours per month, which is super epic. That's going to be at $50 a month, an absolute bargain in my humble opinion. And so yeah, keep on the lookout for that. But otherwise, thank you supporters so much. You guys are absolute legends. Link and Subscribestar down below. We are getting very close to the $300 a month goal, where I will thus be able to upgrade the camera, which will be unreal, among other things. Anyway, let us commence with the thing today. So, capturing Christianity. I do remember, this isn't just me having a faulty memory, but I do remember the title of the video being different. Excuse me, some stuff in my nose. Hey, Puritan Post, lovely to see you, mate. Lovely to see you. And Dalton Blackman, should we change your channel's name to The Other Peter? Perhaps for now. You know what? We're doing. Let's do that. Let me get rid of that and that. Actually, no, I can keep. I want to support the ministry. Yep, cool. Let's do that for now. This is because this is a different today. This is a different day. I'm for the Romanists today. So today I am the other Peter. That's how this is working today. Bro, you should get a green screen behind you so you can have epic Amogus backgrounds. I am planning on that. To be honest, the goal's kind of up in the air. Either a new camera, because my current camera is fine, or something fancy like a green screen, which will be Unreal, or some other software like Epidemic Sound, which will be basically unlimited sound effects and music for content, which will be super, super, super good. So slightly up in the air with the 300 goal otherwise, but currently it's at the new camera, but I may change it. Anyway, so yes, I am the other Peter, and yes, we'll be responding to this stream on Capturing Christianity with Dr. Dustin Crummett. And I believe they start around the 9:30-ish mark for his presentation. He gives a little bit of preliminaries. But otherwise, as we go through it, I'm gonna listen to it in long stretches, and then I'm gonna respond to it as a Romanist, thus giving a warning to fellow Protestants to not make the same arguments because they are not good, to put it lightly. Clearly, Dr. Crummett is not greatly familiar with the field of Protestant Roman Catholic dialogue. Some of that ASMR tea sipping. CC needs to have Jordan Cooper on his channel for real. That's 100% true. 100% true. He will eventually be having me for debate with Jimmy Aiken. He actually mentioned it in the Q&A in this very stream. Still sorting it out. He hasn't gotten back to me with another query I had for some reason, but oh well, it'll be happening eventually. Or Martin Chemnitz, true. Alan Rule, lovely to see you, lad. Romanist debunking, that is right. Where is your papers hat? Got it right here, ready to go. I actually made a new and improved one. It's easier to read. I didn't just use a little pen. I used a proper texter. But yes, I'll be donning the mitre today in order to really put myself in the mood, put myself into the mindset of the Romanist. And so if you'll just give me 1 second to put this on. Actually, no, I'll close this for a second so you guys can really see. So here's my good old-fashioned mitre with all the papists, with all the popery and the Romanism on it. So I can be really, really immersed in this response. And you guys can as well. So like that for that side. Whoopsie daisies. This is gonna be. Just give me a sec. This is gonna be fun. Okay, so that's in, and then hang on. Oh, got it. Okay, epic. All right, we're good, boys. We are ready to go with the crap. Hang on, go back. How do I balance it out? Bring it back. Ah, come on, it fell out. Of course it did. Oh, of course it did. 1 sec. I hope this doesn't take up like half an hour. I don't think it will. Ah, come on. Okay, this is getting annoying. Okay. Actually, you know what? Even better idea. Just push this thing back. Looks so realistic. That's so true, Matt. So true. Good to see you. Ah, this is so annoying. I did it perfectly last night to test it out. But now it's like annoying the hell out of me. Okay, let's do it like that. And then like, come on, get in there, you piece of crap. There we go. Okay. We're great. Hang on. Got myself the good old Oran's posture. Okay, I want to make sure it's not crooked. Why is it crooked like that? Okay. All right. That's okay. We got it, boys. It's working absolutely beautifully. And someone says to get tape. I probably will after this because I do want to keep using this again in the future. Someone should make this an emoji for Discord. I deliberately posed for a few seconds so someone can take a screenshot, whether now or some other time. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is I, the other Peter. We are ready for this response to this dirty, dirty Protestant. I guess this is the debut of a perhaps recurring character in the other Paul cinematic universe. Let me do this one more time so I can get it perfect. Like, oh, this is great. This is beautiful. You may be bishop, but you aren't Mark Excellency. No, I'm even better. I am the God Emperor of mankind. Looks like the devil has prevailed. Indeed. Indeed, he has. All right. So now I'm the Romanist. I'm the other Peter. I'm ready to absolutely take down this dirty Protestant. And yeah, next time I'm going to tape this up in a way so that, because the issue is if this front bit, this is good. This is a deliberate design choice that it curves like this so that it stays rigid and the thing doesn't flop back. Because of the last design, it did that because it wasn't curved at the bottom. Anyway, so let's put this up. This is the other Peter. I am the Romanist apologist. I am the Protestant who is going to give the best Romanist refutation of this Protestant presentation around the entire internet. Even if others like Trent Horn or Joe Heschmeyer, whoever, do responses to it, I, the other Peter, am going to give the greatest response. None of them are going to beat me. So yes, we are here. The other Peter is ready to go. Let's destroy some Protestants. Doug Belt, hello. This is great. Hope to see Hume again. Let's destroy this Protestant.
Yeah. So I think again, I want to try to survey some things from a number of different areas. I think there are problems having to do with history, with ethical claims, with metaphysical claims, with internal consistency. So I want to talk about a variety of different such claims. When it comes to history, first of all, there's the question of the history of the papacy. You had, I thought, a good video with Gavin Ortland about this a while ago. And he got some criticism from people. But again, what he was saying was not about the history of the papacy was not controversial, even among a lot of Catholic historians, people like Eamon Duffy or Raymond Brown, who was a Catholic priest.
Okay, this is the first problem. This is really, arguably, this is the primary methodological flaw of his entire presentation. It basically stands or fall on the appeal to scholarship. So the scholars say it's uncontroversial in the scholarship, and using that as a basis for truth claims. And that's very unfortunate because, as Romanists will rightly try to do, is to say, well, even if that is the case, they're wrong, and here's why. And they'll actually appeal to the primary source evidence itself. So yeah, that's a key methodological problem that particularly in the first part where he gives the historical claims. The second part is his ethical ones, which I think is better. And he actually does reference a book which I hadn't heard of before, and I actually do kind of want to get, but otherwise still similar issues. But nonetheless, this is mainly for his historical claims. He will appeal to, oh, well, this is uncontroversial in the scholarship and therefore debunked. And the reason why I mentioned the title before, because I swear this was not the title originally, How Catholicism Can Be Proven False. So it looks like he's just providing a how to possibly do it, but not actually doing it himself. Whereas the original title, I very clearly remember it was something like Proof Against Catholicism. If there's like an archive of the stream or whatever from before this was edited, like probably the same day, then that would be awesome if I could find it and to confirm that. But I swear the title was not like that. But anyway, key methodological problem: appeal to scholarship. It's not that any appeal to scholarship is bad, but just simply saying, oh, well, it's uncontroversial or more scholarly consensus, therefore truth. That's silly. And the Romanists can very easily dispatch of that. Just appeal to primary source evidence. Just go into where the scholars themselves are making comments on and say, no, these scholars are, whoever's allegedly saying this, they're wrong because X, Y, and Z. And we're gonna see that throughout his historical claims here. That's a Muslim tactic or a conservative scholar to show them that two can play that game. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I guess he'd say I'm not just talking about any individual scholar, but like consensus or majority, in which case I'd still say, well, who cares? Consensus and majorities change all the time. But even then, when a lot of people and even other scholars say, "Oh, well, this is scholarly consensus," I think it would just be common sense to have evidence for that as well. Like, can you pull up a survey of scholars either in this wide field or even if specifically of those who have studied this issue with their opinions? Can you give me that survey? Because so many times, like 99% of the time, people, both scholars and laymen, will make claims of scholarly consensus, but based entirely on their personal inferential gleaning from the scholarship and not actually from like a survey, if that makes sense. I've always found that very stupid. And that's been scoffed. And I've seen someone else make the same point on a academic biblical blog, but on Larry Hurtado's blog, actually. And Hurtado, God bless his soul, just kind of scoffed at it and just dismissed the idea. But it was like, well, isn't that true? You should have survey data. It's kind of silly. This is like Shabir Ali or Paul Williams. Yeah, exactly. It's very much like that. But yeah, so this is a very key method that Crummett relies on. And this is actually the part where I think that this really does tie into his lib views, his very lib views, because liberals very often are like this. Almost scholarly consensus says this, most scientific consensus says that, with very minimal dealing of the actual evidence itself. So yeah, that's a key problem. Look out for that. It's going to plague his entire presentation.
And maybe the most prominent Catholic historian of the 20th century. The church teaches that the papacy was established by Jesus, that Peter was the first pope, that the pope has these powers of universal jurisdiction and being able to teach everybody and being infallible in certain circumstances, and that Peter's status as the pope and at least some of these things that go along with being the Pope have been what the church has always taught. They've been known in every age. They've been recognized by the universal custom of the church. And again, as far as I know, really the consensus of historians is that this is not true. The papacy as an office and then the powers that were attached to the papacy developed over time, long after the apostles were all dead, for what were largely political reasons. And so the story about the papacy that you get in Vatican I, that is just not true. And you can see that by looking at writings of church fathers and seeing that the Eastern churches never acknowledged the papacy, the supremacy of the Pope.
Okay, so a wide slew of claims there. And this can be easily refuted. With appeals to a Romanist appealing to, for example, Saint Irenaeus, where he talks about the necessity of of all churches, of the churches across the world, obeying the See of Rome, because Rome is, in some sense, an exemplar of the deposit of the faith of the apostles, including with particularly as being founded by both Peter and Paul themselves. And so that's there. Whatchamacallit talks about the Eastern Church Fathers denying the papacy and all that. Well, hang on, what about Saint Maximus, who seems to very strongly talk about the preeminence and perhaps even indefectibility of the See of Rome? Saint Maximus the Confessor, he's a massive Eastern Father, and he talks about that. And then, of course, we can appeal to Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who talks about the city of Rome. In his letter to the Roman Church, he talks about them presiding in love. Who else does he talk about? Does he talk about any other church in his letters presiding, quote unquote, in love or in anything? I don't think so. Very clearly, we can look at that. We can look at the evidence from Irenaeus. Take those together, as well as Eastern testimonies, like, as I said, Saint Maximus the Confessor, who has a very, 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 very high view of the Pope. You have the what was it, the letter of Agatho or something, Pope Agatho, things like that, and other documents accepted in ecumenical councils, which are ratified by the East, and yet they had very, 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 very high papal claims. He doesn't deal with this evidence. He gives very, very broad brush. Oh, well, the Eastern Fathers didn't accept it, and it's the historical consensus that the papacy developed for political reasons. It's like, well, Jesus saying to Peter, "You are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And whatsoever you, Peter, singular, bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and then loose and so on. That does not sound like political reasons. That sounds like it started by Christ himself. That he specifically pointed out Peter and said, specifically you, Peter, you're getting the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And that the language of keys in the ancient world is very much derivative of the power of authority, the power over a palace, if you will. Of course, there is the Eliakim argument, for example, the Eliakim typology or illusion, where it's very clear. And then I can even appeal to the Jesus typology to Eliakim, which is a very direct citation of Isaiah chapter 21, I think, where it talks about Eliakim having the keys over the house of David. It's given that imagery is given to Jesus, and yet that can simply be said that it only strengthens what it looks like for Peter, because Peter's also giving a set of keys. It's almost like Peter is in a vicarious sense, vicar of Christ, in a representational sense, also given the keys alongside Jesus. And so we can very easily respond to this very general claim with an immediate response of, well, Peter was given these powers. And then logically, given the nature of authoritative offices throughout the world in any time or context, whether it's political or religious, that those powers are passed down to a successor following on. And who were the chief successors of Peter? There were successors in Antioch, sure. But the successors in Rome were the primary recipients of Peter's office, especially because of the fact that Peter's relics, Peter was martyred there and his relics were in Rome. That was actually a very key, how would I say it? That was a key indicator across the early church for where the authority of an apostle lies, where his primacy lies. And so the primacy, at bare minimum, the primacy over the Western churches that were evangelized by Peter and Paul lie in Rome, because Peter and Paul's, but especially Peter's relics, were in Rome and or are in Rome. So yeah, he's just simply saying, oh, well, the scholars say this developed over time. He doesn't give any evidence for that. I've given evidence that at bare minimum, Peter had a very high status. Rome had a very high status, which is very much cognizant with the papacy. And yet Dr. Crummett here just gives some very vague allusions and citations and all that stuff. Again, to take off the Romanist hat, these arguments can be elaborated to a degree that I believe are very successful, that the Roman claims do fail, but only after some serious elaboration in response to certain Romanist responses like the one I just gave. And Dr. Crummett doesn't do that. That's the problem. This was billed as proof, but it was just at best like a basic primer in standard Protestant responses, which aren't even used on their own anyway because of how far the argument has developed. Alan Rules says, Eastern testimony is Stephen of Dore. In his letter, he quotes all three proof texts, Matthew 16, Luke 22, John 21, and applies them exclusively to the Pope. I remember you mentioning that. Thank you for bringing that up once again. And then, of course, there's the Tome of Leo, which spoke highly definitively on the controversy of the time, and that was accepted by the East. And so clearly, they had a recognition of the Pope's authority over the Christian world for the Tome of Leo to make such high claims as it did. So yeah, ultimately, here I am, a Romanist, giving primary source citations, telling people where they can look, and Dr. Crummett giving very, very vague arguments. So it doesn't really work. Kind of cringe. Let's keep going.
By looking at the way that ecumenical councils were conducted, all sorts of things.
Again, very vague. And clearly, certain ecumenical councils reflected Roman primacy, if not supremacy.
I think the way that will probably be most familiar to people is just by looking at the New Testament. And appealing to that, I'm not appealing to some kind of like sola scriptura thing or something. I'm just thinking there are places where you would expect if the writers in the New Testament thought that Peter was the Pope, it probably would have come up.
Well, that's vague.
In the letters in the New Testament where church offices are discussed extensively, there's no indication to my mind that there is a Pope or that Peter is the Pope. In Galatians, Paul seems to me, and again to most biblical scholars, to be very clearly putting himself on the same level as Peter and the other apostles. He disagrees with Peter and is not at all worried about disagreeing with the Pope. He mentions the so-called pillars of the church, James, Peter, and John, but there's no indication that Peter has any special status. He very clearly, is saying, I was not appointed by Peter or by anybody else. I was appointed by Jesus. I went to Peter. We agreed. I was sent to preach to the Gentiles. He was sent to preach to the Jews. That's it. There's no indication that Peter is the Pope there, and a lot of indication that Paul doesn't think that. If we look at the book of Acts, again, this is a history book where one of the characters allegedly is the Pope, but there's no clear evidence that he's the Pope. In fact, in Acts 15, when they have a church council, it looks like James is the person who makes the decision. Peter and Paul both speak, and then James says, my judgment is. That doesn't seem like it fits very well with Peter being the Pope. In the Gospels, if you're writing a biography of Jesus,
before he gets onto the Gospels, I'll respond to what he claims about the letters and all. So it's very vague. If there was the Pope's office, it would have been mentioned. It was important. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? The mere existence of silence doesn't prove anything. You've got to actually demonstrate that the silence is meaningful. And let's take a look at all the letters of the New Testament themselves. Do any of them deal with issues regarding universal authority over the Christian world? They do not. And so we can have a reason to believe that we can have a reasonable hypothesis that the papacy was true, and yet say Paul or even Peter don't even need to mention the fact that, oh, by the way, there's a Pope in Rome or there's a Pope in Peter, and you got to submit to that. Especially if this was something that was just a given, and you don't even need to reiterate it if there's no controversy over it. So it makes sense for why there's silence. Now, again, taking the Romanist hat off, I believe there's good responses to this. I believe there is a way to make this argument work, but this is just me giving key immediate responses that Romanists can and inevitably will give if people respond to this video, to this stream. So this is just me giving that basic thing. Me playing as the other Peter. I'm the other Peter for this stream. Keep that in mind. But yeah, silence has to be meaningful. You have to demonstrate that. If we look at criteria by, for example, Father Gilbert Garrigan, a guide to historical method, he will point to two criteria where A, the author would have known about the thing. So presumably all the apostles in the New Testament, they would have known about the papacy and Peter. Okay, cool. Second, they would have, in the immediate circumstances of their texts, mentioned it. And we can highly dispute that. None of their texts about universal are about immediate universal authority over the church or the question of universal church governance and all that jazz. And so it's not a surprise that the papacy isn't mentioned at all. And even then, it's irrelevant. You need only one good text that demonstrates the thing exists in order to say, hey, it exists. And then silence is anywhere. It doesn't matter. Perfect example, we know very solidly that the letter to the Romans was written in the 50s by Paul the Apostle, okay? Uncontroversial. That's genuinely uncontroversial. Something we can agree on the basis of evidence. And yet, if we had the letter of Clement of Rome, First Clement, so whether you date it in the early dates of the 70s or into the 90s, either way, written in the Roman Church either by the collective Roman hierarchy or specifically by Clement of Rome himself, the Bishop of Rome. And he very strongly pulls from Pauline language, including from Romans. And he even directly cites Paul's first letter to the Corinthians when writing to them. And yet, not once in his entire letter does he cite Paul's letter to them. You'd think that'd be pretty significant testimony, especially for certain. He addresses he addresses some of the exact same arguments, issues that Paul does in the Romans, to the point where you think you're reading Paul for a second, especially Clement's section on justification, chapter 33 or 36, one of those, where he basically mirrors Paul's argument in Romans, and yet he never directly cites it. I guess, therefore, from that silence, Paul's letter was actually a forgery written after the 70s AD. Obviously not, given other countervailing evidence we have. Likewise with the papacy, even if we grant all the silence in the rest of the New Testament, it doesn't matter. We have clear demonstration of the papacy in the Gospels and in Acts, such as in Matthew 16, that Peter is the rock upon which the church is built. And logically, given the nature of offices, that this would be passed down. We can point to, of course, the allusion to Eliakim, a key element of his office. It was a permanent office. It was something that was passed down. It wouldn't just die with him. So this is very, very key. Pauline papacy is very cringe. It doesn't exist. It is clearly Petrine papacy. So yeah, it doesn't work. Oh, hello. I haven't seen you before. Bourgeois. Hello, my Protestant brothers. Yeah, you might have Protestant brothers in the chat. I'm not one of your Protestant brothers. You're one of those dirty, heretical, separated brethren. This is the other Peter. I don't know why people are talking about the other Paul here. But that cringe Prot, this isn't his channel. This is the other Peter here. Okay. So please show respect to Papa Pope. But yeah, that's some basic stuff. And then he talks about Acts in the Acts 15 council, about how James says, "I judge," quote unquote. But that isn't contrary to the papacy. There are bishops in ecumenical councils who speak, and all bishops do to an extent have authority, even in ecumenical councils. They can say that I judge this, I judge that. The only thing with the papacy is that Peter himself has the final judgment. And in fact, if we look at Acts 15 itself, there is clear evidence for Petrine supremacy there. He says, it is said in the Acts 15 council. So starting from Acts 15, verse 1 onwards. I'm reading from, I'm not going to, ESV. Why do I have the ESV open? That's disgusting. No. I'm going to open up the Douay-Rheims edition of the New Testament. Why is it the 1899 Douay-Rheims? Does that work? No, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. Okay, Douay-Rheims Bible online. I am only reading from the Douay-Rheims. Unless some silly Protestant wants to argue about, but my translation, my textual criticism, and then I can absolutely own them on that point as well. But otherwise, we are reading from the Douay-Rheims edition in Acts chapter 15, verses 1 onwards. Okay, now I'm reading. And some, actually, let me pull it up as a screen right now. Just tuned in. What happened with Paul? This is the other Peter, and we're arguing against a very silly Protestant, very silly Protestant, Dr. Dustin Crummett, and his presentation on capturing Christianity. And I am refuting it from a Romanist perspective. So now we have the Douay-Rheims Bible open, Acts chapter 15. This actually demonstrates, contra Dustin Crummett, that Peter really was supreme. I beg your forgiveness, papalness. Your penance is giving 100 hyperlatrias to Mary. Okay, that's your penance. Anyway, and some coming down from Judea taught the brethren that except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. And when Paul and Barnabas had no small contest with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of the other side should go up to the apostles and the priests of Jerusalem about this question. They, therefore, being brought on their way by the church, passed through Phoenice and Samaria and relating to the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and by the apostles and the ancients, declaring how great things God had done by them. But there arose some of the sect of the Pharisees that believed, saying they must be circumcised and be commanded to observe the law of Moses. And the apostles and the ancients assembled together to consider this matter. And when there had been much disputing, Peter, rising up, said to them, notice this, Peter rises up first, there's disputing. And then Peter himself rises up and he speaks. He opens this council. He speaks. That's very clearly some sense of primacy in Peter. But then listen to what he says. Men, brethren, you know that in former days God made choice among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knoweth the hearts, gave testimony, giving unto them the Holy Ghost as well as to us, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now, therefore, why tempt you God to put a yoke on the necks of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But by the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, we believe to be saved, in like manner as they also. And all the multitude held their peace, and they heard Barnabas and Paul telling what great signs and wonders had wrought among the Gentiles by them. So, and after they had held their peace, James answered. This is when James says, I judge this, I judge that. Peter spoke first. He established peace among the dissension in the council, and additionally said that by my mouth, that God himself made a choice among Peter, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel. Why specifically by him? Logically, obviously, Christ commissioned all the apostles to hear the word of the gospel from everyone. So clearly he doesn't just mean that in a very generic sense. of by my mouth, I'm going to preach the gospel in that very simple sense. No, clearly there's something special about Peter's own role in giving the gospel to the Gentiles, very clearly. And obviously, the easiest explanation for this is that Peter has a special higher role, distinct from the other apostles, or maybe not totally distinct, but otherwise higher than the other apostles, that he has a sort of primacy, if you will, in bringing the word of the gospel to the Gentiles. And Dr. Crummett, he just ignores all this and goes straight to James saying, oh, I judge this, I judge that, which isn't against papal supremacy. Because, again, the ideal is that everyone agrees with the Pope, that that the Pope doesn't have to use a fiat, submit to me, but that people actually do, that there is real unity actually achieved among those in the presence of the Pope in a council. And so the fact that Peter opens the council, the fact that he causes peace in the council, and James only gives like a sort of addendum word, and also says that he specifically was commissioned by God to bring the word of the gospel to the Gentiles, which implies a sort of primacy that makes sense in a papacy. Dr. Crummett doesn't address this stuff, and so yeah, the average Romanist can easily give these kinds of arguments and take him down with it. So yeah, that's that, and I will now stop sharing the glorious Dewey Reams Bible. I'm actually, just as an aside, I'm actually kind of toying with Dewey Reams onlyism right now. Either that or Vulgate onlyism, specifically the 16 Clementine Vulgate, the true original divinely inspired Vulgate given to the apostles. So yes, anyway, let us continue. Actually, no, hang on. He also mentioned Galatians. So I'm not going to go there. I'm going to give something. Now, this is both my Romanist self, but also my actual self. Something very interesting I found recently. There is an opinion in scholarship, and it is actually present in very early patristic testimony, that in Galatians, so Crummett talks about how, Paul opposed Peter in Galatians. Clearly, Paul's putting himself on the same level as Peter. He's criticizing Peter. I could give the usual Romanist response of, no one's saying you can't, that another apostle or another person can't criticize the Pope and all that. It's just that it would have to happen in his official capacity. And Peter here, Kephas, in Galatians, is not using his official teaching capacity when he's just choosing to not sit with the Gentiles. That's not him getting on the chair and saying, I declare that I will not sit with the Gentiles, or I declare that Jews should not sit with the Gentiles. That's not what he's doing. Peter's not doing that. He's not doing an official capacity. So he can be rightly criticized. That doesn't oppose the papacy. But even more significantly, and again, I'm going to take my Romanist hat off for this because this is actually genuinely really amazing. I only found this recently, that it's very possible that Kephas and Peter in Galatians are two separate persons. Now, this isn't just some libtard redactional thing like, two different people got conflated as one. No, this is actually present in very early church fathers. I'm going to read a citation from Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History, Book 1, Chapter 12, where he cites from a lost work of Clement of Alexandria. Pay attention to this. Book 1, Chapter 12. The names of the apostles are obvious to everyone from the Gospels, but no list of the 70 disciples has survived anywhere. It is said, however, that one of them was Barnabas, cited in the Acts of the Apostles, and by Paul in writing to the Galatians. They say that another of them was Sosthenes, who wrote with Paul to the Corinthians. Then there is the story in Clement, in a book called Outlines, Book 5 of Outlines, that the Kephas, about whom Paul says, but when Kephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, was one of the 70 who had the same name as the apostle Peter. Now, that's one testimony. There is also the Epistula Apostolorum, a very early pseudepigraphal, but otherwise arguably late second century text that claims to have been written by the apostles. Where is it? Trying to find the right one. Where is it? Hang on 1 second, trying to find it. So Clement relates that story, Clement of Alexandria, that that Kephas is not the same person as Peter in Galatians, and thus that Paul is not actually attacking Peter, his holiness, the supreme Pope himself. So even this argument may actually be dead in the water at the start. Now I'm going to look at the Epistula Apostolorum, 2nd century pseudepigraphal work that claims to have been collectively written by the apostles. Now, pay attention to this. Second paragraph in the intro. We, John, Thomas, Peter, Andrew, so Peter and Andrew, brothers, James, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Nathaniel, Judas Zelotes, and Cephas, write unto the churches of the east and west, of the north and south, and the declaring and imparting unto you that which concerneth our Lord Jesus Christ. Peter and Cephas, two different persons in this second century pseudepigraphal work that cites the names of apostles. So these are only two references I know of, and I think there are actually a number of other patristic citations, and it's very possible. What arguably the best explanation for this is that the early church, they were uncomfortable. Well, for one, they may have simply just seen in Galatians that there's a guy called Cephas, and then in one moment Paul switches to a guy called Peter, and then he goes back to Cephas. There can be ways where the same person is named with distinct names in the same passage, but it can still be discerned that it's the same person. But otherwise, in the Galatians passage, it's very disjunctive. It does very clearly seem like there are two different people, Cephas and Peter. But also, very arguably, the reason why the early church may have actually wanted to emphasize that Cephas and Peter were different people, the best explanation is that there was a special respect for Peter, that they were kind of uncomfortable with the idea of one apostle attacking another apostle, and not just any apostle, but Peter himself, the prince of the apostles. So this makes very perfect sense in the view of the papacy, and thus the objection from Galatians is totally and utterly nullified. Now, again, taking off my Romanist hat, this is unironically a very compelling theory that Cephas and Peter are different people. I can see arguments for why it may still be the same person, but otherwise it is a genuinely compelling theory that Cephas and Peter are distinct people. Joshua Tennis, is this the view Augustine attacked in his letter to Rome, or is that staged argument view? I'm not sure. I haven't seen that letter. So who did Paul rebuke? He rebuked Cephas, a certain disciple called Cephas, not Peter himself, but Cephas. So yeah, that's who that is. And as we heard from Eusebius' citation of Clement of Alexandria, this Clement may have been one of the 70 disciples. So yeah, distinct person, not Peter. So Paul is not rebuking Peter, and thus the argument is a non-starter. And even if he was rebuking Peter himself, it was not an issue of teaching. So yes, this argument from Galatians does not work. Very simple. Romanists have very good responses to that. And so, yeah, let's keep going.
With Peter being the Pope. In the Gospels, if you're writing a biography of Jesus, you would think appointing Peter as the Pope would be like one of the most important things that Jesus ever did, right? And I think at least 3 of the Gospels, it's pretty uncontroversial. They don't give any account of Peter being appointed as the Pope.
Oh, it's uncontroversial. Here it is again. Just the historians. It's more scholars, more historians. It's uncontroversial. Well, said contra, it very much is controversial. I very much submit to you that Peter was appointed. So I mentioned before Matthew 16, 18, how clearly Peter is the rock. The Romanists can very easily say that Peter is the rock upon which the church is built. There is the language of the keys of the kingdom, which alludes to Eliakim, but also potentially to the fact that Jesus also fulfills Eliakim in some way. And so we get a vicarious relationship with Peter exercising Christ's keys on earth. The logical necessity of well, not strictly logical, but like just the basic fact of reality that offices are passed down. And so presumably Peter's powers would be passed down as well to successors. But then there's also other passages as well, particularly the feed my lambs, feed my sheep thing passages. At the very end of John, at the very ending of the Gospel of John itself, where Jesus says, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, he specifically talks to Peter. Why does he specifically single out Peter in John chapter 20 or 20 or 21? I think it's 20. Specifically saying to Peter, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my flock, all that jazz. Why does he say that specifically to Peter in the presence of the other disciples? They're all there. Why doesn't Jesus collectively address them? Why does he specifically mention Peter? Best explanation, quite simply, Peter had a special status where he was particularly responsible for the flock in a way that the other apostles were not to the same degree, which very logically leads to an idea of greater responsibility, greater authority. over that the other apostles do not share in. And so it's clear from that Peter was special. Also from Luke chapter, Luke, what was it again? Luke 22, I believe, where Jesus at Gethsemane, I think it's, wait, is it Gethsemane or is it? No, not Gethsemane. Jesus says to Peter, Peter, the devil has wanted to sift you, plural. In the Greek, Jesus used the plural, humis. The devil wanted to sift you, plural, the apostles, like wheat. And then Jesus says, but I prayed for you, Peter, singular, that your faith would not fail. And once you have returned, strengthen your brothers. So Jesus specifically praying for the faith of Peter, a very clear establishment of the idea of the indefectibility of Peter and logically his successors, given that the powers do pass down. So Peter won't defect. Excuse me, I always have this crap in my nose for some reason. Peter won't defect. Jesus prays for him specifically over the other apostles. This makes sense in a view that Peter was above the other apostles in some way. He did have a greater status to some degree over the other apostles. And it makes sense in a papacy view. It doesn't make sense on a totally flat, egalitarian, apostolic view like Dr. Dustin Crummett would be given here. Lucas Pacitti, is that how you pronounce it, Pacitti? That argument was cringe. Isn't one gospel enough? The guy wants the same teaching repeated in every gospel. Yeah, exactly. You only need an account bringing in one gospel. If one gospel said on Tuesday morning, on the Ides of March, AD 30, Jesus went to the market and picked up an apple. And that's mentioned in only one gospel, and it's not mentioned in the others. That's a very mundane claim. Would it say, oh, the other gospels don't mention it, therefore, not even that it didn't happen, but just that the other gospels didn't mention it, therefore, that passage doesn't mean that Jesus went down to the market to get an apple on the Ides of March. Like that doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. You only need one gospel to mention something to therefore say that this testimony is in the gospels. So yeah, it's kind of a silly argument, very arbitrary standard in that respect. Yeah, so those are the key passages there. There's others, such as with the Garden of Gethsemane. I'll also mention how Peter himself was, all the apostles were asleep while Jesus was praying. But then Jesus specifically chastised Peter. Why didn't he chastise the other disciples? Clearly because he had a higher expectation, a higher standard for Peter, which is which is perfectly expected of someone who has a particular leadership role above others. And of course, if you want to see these arguments, for the nature of Peter's supremacy, you can pick up Joe Heschmeyer's book, Pope Peter, Defending the Church's Most Distinct Doctrine in a Time of Crisis. He basically goes through every argument that Dustin Crummett brings up regarding the person of Peter in the Gospels, and just walks through them like an absolute cakewalk. Again, taking off the Romanist hat, this is just basic Romanist responses to the presentation by Dustin Crummett. There are good Protestant responses further, but otherwise, in terms of immediate response, Crummett's presentation was not good and can be easily refuted by basic level Romanist arguments. So, yeah, that's that, and we can keep going.
The traditional Catholic view is that Matthew does narrate Peter being the Pope when he says, "You are the rock on which I'll build my church," etc., etc. My view is, I mean, there's a lot of dispute about how to interpret that passage and stuff. My view is that can't quite be Peter being appointed Pope, because that story is in all of the gospel. The story of Peter's confession. So Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, and then in Matthew he says, "You are the rock on which I'll build my church." The story of Peter's confession is in all of the gospels. Matthew is the only one who includes this part of where Jesus says, "You are the rock," and then gives him this binding and loosing power. And if that was really Peter being appointed the Pope, it seems inconceivable to me that the other three gospel authors all told the story, but didn't include the part where he was appointed Pope. I mean, that's a very important part of the story.
It seems inconceivable to me. So just a basic fallacy argument from incredulity. Yeah, doesn't work. Doesn't matter. The fact that the other gospels don't have it, that again, bring it with the analogy of only one gospel mentioning that Jesus went to the market on the Ides of March on AD 30 to pick up an apple. The fact that the other gospels don't mention it, oh, well, why don't they all mention it? Doesn't matter why they don't mention it. We can debate that. Fact is, it is mentioned in one gospel. Exact same one here. Whatever the other gospels say with those accounts, whatever, even if they're silent on the specific parts that talk about Petrine supremacy, doesn't matter. The fact is, Matthew does reference that part. And we can speculate as to how the gospel authors adapted the story and all that jazz, how they pick certain parts and not others and all that. Fact is, Matthew does raise this up, and we can very clearly see that it does denote a very special office on the part of Peter. And so silence in other gospels, sure, we can discuss why there might be silence there, but clearly it doesn't mean that therefore it doesn't denote Petrine supremacy in Matthew. That doesn't work at all. Doesn't work at all.
And so putting together the New Testament evidence with other historical evidence, it seems to me there's a very clear argument against the papacy.
Wow. That was it. That is, wow. That was unbelievably short. Wow. Hat off. I've seen this before. But again, just having to say it again, wow, that is a bloody short, underwhelming argument. Like, wow. Might as well just remove that section of text if he feels that way, lol. I mean, this is Dustin Crummett. We're talking like, it's one thing to be an inerrantist, where it's one thing to not be an inerrantist, where you don't believe the Bible has zero errors at all. But you could still be where it doesn't have errors with respect to faith, but it could nonetheless make historical errors and all that. Dustin Crummett isn't even that. I remember seeing another interview of his with some dumb atheist channel where he says, oh, well, where on the gay issue, where he says, oh, well, Paul was clearly wrong. He was just using the views of his time, blah, 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 blah. So it's just, so knowing Dr. Crummett, he'd probably do that. He probably would do that if he felt compelled to. How many sources did he cite? Grand total of some passages, vague allusions to passages, doesn't really go into it. Collectively cites the Eastern Fathers and the Church Fathers, and that's about it, basically. So yeah, kind of cringe so far. And apparently that's his key historical representation.
They're also required to believe some other very specific historical things. For instance, things having to do with Mary, the perpetual virginity of Mary, the assumption of Mary bodily into heaven. And you can contrast the situation here with, say, the resurrection. We know that belief in the resurrection began almost immediately, right? If belief in the resurrection had begun 150 years later, that would be very suspicious. You'd wonder, like, did the early Christians not know about it?
Not necessarily.
Did they not think it was important? And that's really sort of what we find with these Marian dogmas. The New Testament evidence, to my mind, suggests that they think that Jesus has biological brothers, which would suggest that she was not a perpetual virgin.
No.
It talks about Jesus's brothers, and it never mentions that they're not his biological brothers. It talks about Mary's virginity until she got married, and it doesn't mention that she remained a virgin afterwards, even though that would be kind of relevant, because the main criticism that pagans and similar people made of the virgin birth is, well, she just had extramarital sex and lied about it, right? And if you could point to the fact, no, she never had sex, that would be very relevant. That never came up. And you would think that people, I mean, Jesus's family was involved in the church. James was apparently running the church in Jerusalem. You would think that they would know whether Jesus had biological brothers or not, whether Mary had taken a vow of celibacy or not. And you would think they would be interested in this, given the interest in Mary's virginity. So if this was true, you would expect that it would be mentioned. Similarly, if Mary was really...
Once again, very vague, you would expect it to be mentioned. But, well, okay, maybe it was, but so many ancient historical sources are lost, let alone stuff that was said verbally and yet just never got recorded. God knows how many things that were said and believed and passed around that were either never recorded or recorded but eventually lost, you know? Second, once again, so again, mere silence, that doesn't mean anything. Point to specific texts that we have in question and demonstrate why the perpetual virginity. So not just the prepartum, but in partu and postpartum virginity, the triple virginity, the Roman position. Why those other two elements must have been mentioned. With the virgin birth, that's very curious when he says, oh, you'd expect the perpetual virginity to be mentioned because that was the accusation against Mary, that she was not actually a virgin. It's only necessary to just mention the prepartum virginity in order to dispel of the accusation that she was not that Mary was not a virgin when giving. That Mary was not a virgin when she gave birth to Christ, that she had sex and all that. That's all you need to mention. They don't need to mention in partu or postpartum virginity. But B, we can see in the Gospels that at least specifically in the Annunciation in Luke, that Mary does give a vow of perpetual virginity, and thus we can very reasonably conclude, even if we grant it's not absolute airtight and you can argue your way around it, there's a difference between proving something beyond reasonable doubt and demonstrating that it's a reasonable belief. And that's all I need to do. It's a very reasonable belief that Mary, in her in Luke, talks about gives a vow of virginity. She says, how can this, when the angel says, you shall bear a son to Mary, and Mary says, how will this be, since I am not knowing a man? Now, here's the thing. That doesn't make any sense. People can easily see when someone tells them you're going to, an angel or a prophet or whoever tells them you're going to have a son. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to have the funny time in bed, and then I'm going to give birth to a son. That's very logical. Why is Mary perplexed at her at the announcement that she's going to have a son? It only makes sense when we read, since I'm not knowing a man, as a genuine active state on her part that she is abstaining from marital relations. It does not make sense if she nonetheless is going to engage in normal marital relations, because she bloody well knows how she's going to have a son through marital relations. But if she's actively abstaining from that, then we know that then we can see why she's confused at the angel's request. And thus also this makes sense of the other brothers in the Gospels and all. There is no reason, he gives no reason to read the statements of brothers in the Gospels as something like, say, legal brothers, whether children formerly from Joseph's former family, or simply relatives and all that jazz. He gives no arguments against this. There's a dozen possibilities. Pick your poison for how to read brothers and sisters in the Gospels. They don't have to be biological. Very likely, very, very much most likely, they can easily be the former children of Joseph. And given what the Gospels show, it does very strongly imply, with at least one of the Gospel texts, I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but where it names the order of Jesus' family with his brothers in that, and Jesus is named last which strongly implies that he's actually the youngest brother, which therefore makes much more sense, only makes sense on a view that his other brothers and sisters are not biological. If you want to maintain the virgin birth, that is. That doesn't make sense. It really, really doesn't. You've been reading Petrie. I mean, I've been reading all around. I have is that Petrie? Yes, I have Petrie's book on the Jewish background of the Eucharist and that, but I actually otherwise haven't read much other things of him. This stuff is very, very common in Roman circles, very, very common responses. And again, taking off the hat, there can be responses to that as well. But putting the Roman hat on again, just on a basic level, a first order, first response, very easy to come back at. Very easy to refute these very basic statements by Dustin Crummett. Many, many possibilities. There's also the other possibility that at least with some brothers like James, what was it, James and John, I think, two alleged brothers of Jesus, it's important to note also that the Gospel of John mentions a certain Mary, the wife of Clopas, whose children are James and John. And so at least for those two, it's very possible that these aren't even Mary's children at all, even in a legal sense. They're of or at least the Blessed Virgin herself, and just from a different Mary herself altogether. Bertuzzi, Christian, Mary is perpetually virgin. Pagan. Oh, now I believe the Virgin Mary. Wait. Christian, Mary is perpetually virgin. Pagan. Oh, now I believe the Virgin Mary. Not sure. Pagan. Virgin birth is absurd. Christian, actually Mary was perpetually virgin. Pagan. Oh, now I believe the virgin birth. I think what you get where you're getting at. Like Crummett's expectations are pretty stupid. But surprisingly, so many RC people in the comments found these arguments by Crumpet by Crumpet frightening. That's why I've always thought when I've heard Crummett's name around, I've always imagined him to have a very high and posh British accent. My name is Dr. Dustin Crummett. My name is Dr. Dustin Crummett, and I am a libtard. I always imagined that. I knew that wasn't his voice, but I always imagined it like that. The name is just so in your face British, and that's why Crumpet. My name is Dr. Dustin Crumpet. Crumpet. Okay, we've got to move on. Yeah, pretty poor arguments, very easy to respond to.
So if this was true, you would expect that it would be mentioned. Similarly,
You
if
would
Mary was
expect
really
again. Why?
assumed bodily into heaven, that would be hugely significant, right? That's a very impressive miracle. And you would think that her family would know whether that was true or not. And you would think that people would write about it and so forth. But in fact, what we find is that these beliefs develop much later in ways that are perfectly consistent with them being legends, often at times when it kind of makes sense why there would be some motivation to make up the story. The perpetual virginity, the first source we have for it is this book called the Proto-Evangelion of James.
Okay, and so just making very broad statements, not actually going to the primary source evidence itself, giving very broad brush statements, no evidence to back him up. Yeah, it's silly. So again, mere silence doesn't mean anything. We can ask, why is the assumption silent in other dogmas, perhaps in the earliest period? For one, we can very clearly point to typology, very clear typology in the New Testament and statements in the New Testament, such as, for example, Revelation 12, the woman in heaven who's very clearly meant to mirror Mary, how she's giving birth to Christ, very much mirroring the story of Christ and Mary. And notice this, she's in heaven. She is in body in heaven with a crown of stars and the moon under her feet. And yet everywhere else in Revelation, it talks about those in heaven having their souls or their spirits in heaven. And yet Mary, it's not saying the spirit of Mary is in heaven, but just that she is there, that she is a woman with a body in heaven who is clearly Mary giving birth to Jesus. That makes perfect sense. Why is that the case? Why is there that simple detail? Why doesn't he simply say that Mary's soul up in heaven, or all the other saints, that they're all body and soul in heaven? Clearly, it's because Mary has a special kind of entrance into heaven with the fact that she wasn't just taken up with her soul, but with her body. And then additionally, there's Old Testament. There's clear Old Testament typologies as well. The idea that the Ark of the Covenant in Revelation is also in heaven and all that was taken up. And Mary, typologically, very explicitly, is the Ark of the Covenant. You can see the parallels between the book of Samuel and Luke. And so it all ties together. It makes perfect sense that Mary was assumed into heaven. Now, why the alleged early silence? For one, there is the Book of Mary's Repose. Okay, so the silence, how early is it? Not actually as late as Crummett would maybe like to say. The Book of Mary's Repose, 3rd century, clearly refers to the Assumption of Mary. Likewise, the 6 books Apocryphon also mention the Assumption of Mary. But nonetheless, if he wants to say, oh well, there's no silence beyond that. Well, if there's silence in the 2nd century or the 1st century, for example, and we can simply respond as Trent Horn did. Why the arbitrary? What's your standard for saying this amount of silence is okay? So, for example, would Dustin Crummett be okay with mentions in, let's say, 80 AD, AD 80? Okay, so then we could simply get back to him. Well, that's arbitrary. Why is that? Why we could simply say that's unacceptable. We need a reference back in 40 AD or 30 AD to these things for the perpetual virginity in particular, because obviously Mary died much later than that. So then we can simply push it back. That 80 AD, that's also too late. So again, it's all just very arbitrary, saying, oh, well, that's too late, or oh, well, that's too early, and all. And it's not giving any standards. We could very easily respond to that. But we could also very easily respond. We could also grant that there is a silence and simply give the response of Father Luigi Gambero in his book on Marian doctrines. I've got it on my computer. It's called Mary and the Fathers of the Church. Yeah, that's the one. Mary and the Fathers of the Church, Father Luigi Gambero, Romanist priest. And he gives a simple response that, look, why were these dogmas, why were certain dogmas not very common and only appear at a certain later point in church history? Very easy response. These were believed by the church, but they weren't exactly spoken about often or publicly in order to not risk pagan converts to Christianity being lured to certain pagan practices, but regarding the Blessed Virgin. And we can see that certain Christians ended up doing that, like with the Coloridian cults, for example, where they give proper latria to Mary. And so it makes sense why certain Marian dogmas, they may have been believed from the beginning, but they simply may not have been mentioned a lot in public in surviving writings, simply because the early Christians didn't want to risk ideas of polytheism or idolatry in the Christian religion. And again, not to mention, we don't have a ton of surviving writings anyway, so appealing to silence is still very much handicapped. And Dustin Crummett doesn't go through the evidence. He doesn't contextualize the evidence, just explain its significance. So there's a very easy response to that by that. Everyone who thought Mary had other children, Bonosus, Eudoxius, Eunomius, the Anti-Dicomarianites, and Helvidius were either Arians or Apollinarians. There is the exception of Tertullian, possible exception. He wasn't presumably not Arian or Apollinarian and all that jazz. Who is a better apologist against Romanism, Dr. T. and Crumpets or Jimmy Mohammed White? What the hell? What? Okay. Oh man. Okay. Clearly, the prophet himself, Jimmy Mohammed White, peace be upon him. Clearly, he's the better Roman. He's the better anti-Romanist. Which is why when I am Pope one day, I will be sentencing him to death. How good? Let's keep going.
Which is from like the mid-2nd century.
Oh yeah. Hang on.
A book called the Proto-Evangelion of James, which is from like the mid-2nd century, and is totally incredible. I mean, it's full of things that are obviously not true. The author is lying about who he is. He claims to be James, Jesus' brother, and nobody thinks that that's true. People can go read it and see how incredible it is. So our first mention of it is in fact in this very unreliable source. Many generations.
Doesn't matter. The fact that it does mention this view, that is clearly this view is a view within the Christian milieu. Heretics can mention true things. Let's say, for example, Marian, he believed that Jesus was divine. That's a true belief. Just because it's coming from Marian doesn't make it wrong. Okay. Likewise, the Proto-Evangelium of James. What it does show us is that the perpetual virginity, that was a view in the early church. And even if it does mention a bunch of other wrong things, so that's not really a defeater. Doesn't really matter.
They're at a time when people are preaching celibacy, and you can imagine why people might make up this story. Sorry, my cat is attacking the carpet.
And he's a cat. Classic libtard moment. Classic libtard. He has a cat. Real men, real chads have dogs. Like, if you agree.
The assumption doesn't arise until much later still. And, both of these at the time they arise, we have evidence they're not universally accepted. People disagree about these relevant doctrines. Again, this makes a lot of sense if these are later legendary accretions. This does not make very much sense if these are things that really happened, because
I look like a king.
Christians would have known about them and been interested in them. There are also, to my mind, certain ethical problems. You had Kevin.
Okay,
Valier.
so this largely ends the history section. Again, just more generic, no sources apart from attacking the Proto-Evangelium for bad reasons at that. Generalizations, they clearly have legendary elements. Doesn't demonstrate it at all. Whereas we can very easily demonstrate, we can point to very clear typologies in the New Testament that clearly lead to the reality of Mary's, say, her perpetual virginity, her assumption, and her sinlessness as well. And of course, many Protestants like Crummett would say, oh, well, you can't just use typology. It's okay if the apostles use typology, but you Romanists can't. You can't just use typology whenever you want. You can prove anything. Well, here's the thing. Very clearly, as Michael Lofton himself very easily demonstrated in one of his latest streams, the inconsistency of Protestants. He very clearly demonstrates the apostles themselves used typology to demonstrate the Christ messiahship. And so Crummett should genuinely deal with that. That was a clear apostolic method. Although then again, knowing Crummett, absolute liberal, so he'd probably say, yeah, the apostles' method, that was wrong, that was cringe. So we just simply said to Crummett, anathema, cringe, get out of here, burn you at the stake, all that jazz. But otherwise, any other more head screwed on Protestants who may be taking from Crummett, we simply need to point to the fact that the apostles did use typology. And so if you're gonna reject, the only thing they can do is say, oh, well, it's okay if the apostles do it, but we not. But why? That's 100% arbitrary. There is no principal reason. The Protestants don't give principal reasons for why the apostles can use typology, but we can't. They use it. Why can't we? They're appealing to the nature of the text itself. We can do that. They don't have this special thing. They don't have this special set of glasses where they'll necessarily see things that we won't, especially because they're appealing to the Jews with this stuff. So they're not simply saying by their fiat, I'm an apostle, I can do this typology, no one else can. They're pointing this as proof to the Jews, as if the Jews themselves will be able to see it, which very thus logically entails that we ordinary people can look at typology and demonstrate it as proof to a certain extent. And so any Protestants who deny using typology, cringe, try again. Typology proves the assumption. It proves the perpetual virginity. It proves the Immaculate Conception. It proves everything very easily. Papal bull Vox in Roma declared anathema on cats. Burn him. Absolutely. Favorite part coming up. Oh, yeah. Ethical stuff. Now, this is hat off, unironically, the ethical thing, because he's a mad liberal here. This is going to be funny. This is actually going to be funny. Author Chog, this is all very vague. All I need to do is an Obi-Wan Kenobi hand wave to finish it off. So true. So true. All right. Here's another fun bit coming up.
In my mind, certain ethical problems. You had Kevin Vallier, who he and I are co-authoring a book now, actually, but not about this. You had Kevin Vallier on, and he did a lot of research into Catholic political thought. There's a debate. It's clear the Catholic Church used to preach that it had the ability to direct the state to punish heretics and some similar things. Martin Luther was condemned for saying that it's contrary.
And Jan Hus and others, burn them all, fire, baby, fire.
And there's kind of a tricky issue for Catholics because it looks like these should be things that are unchangeable. So if the church has changed its position, it looks like it's changed its position on something that's unchangeable. If it hasn't changed its position, then it looks like it's teaching something that's very ethically problematic. That the church has.
So very clear category error he's going to be making here. Dustin does not distinguish, ignores the proper distinction of basically circumstance. It's perfectly possible that there were circumstances in which the church was totally correct in burning heretics at one time, but then at another time it may not be prudent. The issue of prudence is a genuine one. The Catholic Church and the Holy Fathers have perfectly considered that. It may be appropriate one time to burn heretics, and it may be not as appropriate in another time, such as today. This has not been infallibly ruled upon, and so I'm free to say that I do believe the church should be burning heretics left, right, and center all day, every day in the center of town, getting that nice smell of bacon up in the air every morning as the screams of Protestant men, women, and children echo throughout the town. That should 100% be happening again today. But nonetheless, I can respect the decision of the hierarchy in choosing not to do it. They may think it's imprudent. I may, in my private interpretation, disagree, but nonetheless, that's not a contradiction. It is fundamentally, at least in certain circumstances, permissible in the church to burn heretics, especially because of the great danger that heretics pose in the Middle Ages to such a great degree. We could see the consequences of unrestricted heresy with the Protestant Reformation, with the whole peasant revolt and all that jazz. And so it is definitely worth it. It is within the power of the church to hand over. Well, here's the thing: it's not even the church that burned them. That's the important thing. It was the state itself that did it, and it is a good thing by the state to, if necessary, put to death heretics because of the great spiritual damage that they wrought. As Thomas Aquinas himself says, that the damage, that destruction of the soul is worse than the destruction of the flesh, and so logically speaking, it is definitely much better to burn heretics. And potentially even save them. They may even regret what they're doing as they're approaching the burning pyre. It's much better for that to happen. than to preserve their bodies and yet allow them to destroy both their own soul and that of others. The church has not contradicted this with the infallible charism. And even if the church does believe that at this present time, it may not be prudent to do that. So no, it's not a contradiction. There isn't an evolution in belief. Reformation leads to secularism, guys. So true. Reformation gave us abortion. So Civatus, we can see the problems with unrestrained heresy with Dr. Crummett. Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, someone should just... I won't say anymore. Never mind that Muslim apologists say the same thing about Christianity. Exactly. It's just another perfect example how Protestants argue like Muslims and atheists. So true. Catholics never do that. We have totally unique arguments. We never, ever borrow the tactics of atheists or Muslims. Not ever, not once.
The ability to tell the state to burn heretics, which I don't think, I know people who I guess are heretical Catholic, they were raised Catholic and changed their mind about certain things. I don't think that the state should
they're wrong.
And so
feelings not mutual, Dustin.
This is a very serious problem, I think. And Kevin's view wound up being that, the church's position now roughly is that it doesn't do this anymore, but it still has the right to.
Yeah.
And I have trouble believing that, and I have trouble believing.
Oh, excuse me. Dustin here with the private. I have trouble believing that. Therefore, proof against Roman Catholicism. Wow. He has trouble believing that, guys. Guys, it's over, guys. Roman Catholicism shut down. Vatican, they're shutting the doors, locking it up for good. They're selling the deed. Dustin Crummett has a problem with the morality of the Roman Catholic Church. He has a personal problem with their beliefs. Please help me.
Some of the other ethical teachings of the Catholic Church. There are also more like directly metaphysical or philosophical problems around, for instance, divine simplicity. It seems like some version of divine simplicity is taught in certain councils. Catholic philosophers I know often will they'll try to endorse some weaker version of divine simplicity and say that that's consistent with what the council says. So they don't take the sort of view that, say, Aquinas or Ed Feser defended. And so there's a question about exactly how strong is the kind of simplicity that Catholics are required to endorse. Is it really what the people who said that you have to believe that God is simple, is it what they meant? Or can you sort of reinterpret that language post hoc in a way that's more plausible? If Catholics are really
hermeneutic of continuity
required to accept a very strong view of divine simplicity, one on which God has no parts and God is identical to his power and his omniscience and his knowledge, then I think you run into a whole range of problems. It's very difficult, for instance, to explain how God can know anything about me or how God can love me or anything like that, because God is exactly intrinsically the same in every possible world. There's
mystery.
God that can change. God has no properties other than himself. And so God can't have beliefs about me or attitudes towards me or anything like that, except in some purely extrinsic sense. Unless we say that God's attitude is just something entirely outside of himself. Maybe God loving.
This is why it's necessary. This is the part where I just bring on Christian Wagner, Militant Thomas. I just bring him on here and he'd absolutely demolish this entirely. So I'm not much on the analytic philosophy stuff myself, apart from the fact that I just know for a fact that Crummett is wrong. So yeah, that's all I need to say about that. Really, it's necessary to have the distinctions between the ad intra and the ad extra. Ad extra, of course, there is somewhat distinction between God's attributes and such. Ad intra, however, they're all one in the same fundamentally. And it has to be. So whatever problems he may have with divine simplicity, whatever personal feeling problems he has against it, it's the only logical explanation for the nature of God and such. And I guess this isn't really a specifically Protestant Catholic issue, because I know there'll be Protestants who will probably take issue with what Crummett says here. But yeah, either way, it doesn't. It's even then, even if we can't fully explain everything, that doesn't mean that therefore the thing is false. Simple as that. There is the issue of mystery. We can accept that. I don't think we have to do that anyway, though. There's good, cogent explanations for how this all works. I'd go to Christian Wagner for that. to refute it. So what else do you specifically say? How can God know me if everything's extrinsic to himself? Like if he was more detailed with the, not exactly sure what he's trying to say there. Because there is external relation. God does have real interaction with us via external relations. That's a thing. That's a fact. So I don't see what the problem is.
Me just as the fact that God sets up a world where things go well for me or something. Even though God setting up the world that way is itself, his choice is also like an extrinsic thing. It just means that he caused the world. And Joe Schmidt has done a lot of good work on this. Quickly, you get into very complicated
agnostic,
issues,
cringe.
This is a serious problem. There are also some philosophical problems around transubstantiation, things like that.
No, it's not.
And then there are also issues.
It just look at that. It just says, "Oh, there's philosophical problems with transubstantiation," and then moving on to the next thing. Like, but what is that proof? Really? Come on, mate. Really? Transubstantiation is true. It's fact. Jesus, and the apostles themselves preach it so clearly in the words of institution, the Lord's Supper. How do you explain it? That this is my body. He's not saying this is a symbol of my body or this is a mere representation. He said, "This is my body." That's it. With the bread and with the wine. It's my word, mate. Come on, mate. Really? I don't even need to respond to that.
Consistency, and particularly internal consistency over time. So there was this guy, John Noonan, who he was a quite conservative Catholic. He was trained in philosophy and law and was appointed a federal judge by Ronald Reagan. But he did all sorts of very respected work on the history of Catholic ethical thought and legal thought. He served on some papal commissions and all sorts of stuff like that. So he wrote this book called A Church That Can and Cannot Change, where he argues that basically the church has in fact changed its teachings on certain ethical topics that are supposed to be unchangeable. For instance, on usury. The church, for over 1,000 years, everybody said usury is wrong, charging money at interest is wrong. There are even natural law arguments explaining why it's wrong in principle, and the very nature of the act is wrong.
So again, not really much to respond to. He doesn't address the issues of what were the nature of these magisterial statements. What was the nature of recent ones in particular, whether it was infallible or not, whether it was ordinary and universal or extraordinary or simply authentic magisterium. Whether they're actually talking about the exact same act in the same circumstance, or if they're talking about how in one circumstance there's a permission and in the other circumstance is not. Doesn't make any of these distinctions. I don't even really need to respond much to that. If he doesn't make the distinctions, there's really no argument to be responded to at all. So I'm sure he probably knows of them, but he just doesn't give them. That's the problem. That's the whole problem with this entire presentation. Usury is condemned. What is T and Crumpets talking about? You tell me, Alan. You tell me. Yeah. And even the distinction between whether it's the church itself or just common practice, even if it's erroneous. Lots of problems, lots of category errors, methodological problems, all that jazz. Unironically, taken off the Romanist hat, I do actually want to get that book by Noonan. It does sound very, very interesting. So yeah.
The church lets people charge interest on money, and it says, well, okay, there was this hidden qualification in all of the old teachings. They only apply it in certain circumstances that don't obtain anymore. But there was no way, to my mind, that anybody living in the year 1000 or whatever could possibly guess that there were these hidden qualifications. And similarly, Noonan's book was criticized by Cardinal Avery Dulles. He wrote an essay in First Things that people can find online. And it seems to me that the way you get out of saying that the teaching has changed is either by qualifying what used to be there in ways that no one could have predicted in advance. You say the teachings about usury were qualified in these ways that no one could have actually known in advance.
Well, how does he demonstrate that? How does he demonstrate that no one could have known that in advance? Does he give evidence? Nope. Doesn't go into the primary sources. Doesn't name it. There's not really much of anything he gives. I'm convinced that CC purposely puts beta prots on his channel to make his swaying to Rome more justified. I don't know about that. I don't think so. I mean, he has Gavin Orland, Dr. Gavin Orland. He's an absolute giga chad in terms of this field. I'm off. Have fun shredding tea and crumpets. Thank you very much, Alan Rule. Make sure to pay your hyperlatrias today. Make sure you do that. Thank you for watching the other Peter. Anyway,
qualifications about modern teachings. So when the Pope nowadays says things condemning slavery, really that's heavily qualified. He's not condemning slavery in principle, even though it looks like it.
Yeah, distinctions, nuance, bro.
Consistent with the old teachings. So
you got nuance, bro. Come on.
It seems to me, first of all, that he's employing a hermeneutic that would never allow anything to count as a change, because you can always put in some reason that wasn't predictable in advance why these things.
That's the power of the magisterium, baby.
It also seems to me, if the point of the magisterium is to introduce clarity and all this sort of stuff, then first of all, the fact that some of the leading Catholic intellectuals in the U.S. can't agree on things like, does the church teach that slavery is always wrong? And second of all, the fact that to get the result that the teachings don't change, you have to put in these qualifications that result in really nobody being able to tell what the teachings are at certain times, because later on we might find out that they
evidence, please,
qualified in some way that was never indicated before.
There's nothing to respond to here. He doesn't give evidence, doesn't even an example that we can sink our teeth into and actually go back and forth with. This isn't proof of anything at all. Doesn't matter. I can think of what he might be thinking of, like with the death penalty and that, for example, and we could simply say, look, the nuances were always there. There was the material in Catholic teaching always there. The magisterium doesn't formally put everything together at once, sure, but the material's all there, even if it's not immediately obvious. And in the end, again, people are only held up to simply believing what the church teaches in their time. If the church develops a more developed understanding later on, people from the past aren't impugned for not knowing that. It's a very simple distinction. There's no problem there.
It seems to me that kind of undermines this supposed clarity that it introduces. So I said quite a lot of things, as I said I was going to. Of course, there are more things that could be said about all of those things. There are also more things that could be said. I mean, I could talk about other topics too, but I think when we look at all of these things, we find again and again that there are problems. The problems are not just in one domain. If it was, say, just an ethical problem, maybe I would think maybe I just have corrupt intuitions or something.
You should think that the entire way. The guy supports abortion and the gay stuff and all that. You should probably be thinking that all day, every day, mate. And actually, there's something else he's going to mention here soon. That'll be funny. Actually, okay, Jace, that's just mean. That's just mean. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy was stoned when he did this debate. Nah, he's not. That's just mean. That's just because he's a liberal doesn't mean he's using. It doesn't mean he's stoned. It does astronomically increase the likelihood of such, but it doesn't mean he is at any present moment. Come on now.
Problems, philosophical problems, ethical problems about internal consistency, problems from lots of different domains, lots of very different serious problems. At some point, I think, something's got to give. At some point, you've got to say, look, we have to do so many things kind of post hoc to make this work out, that the alternative view that the Catholic Church, it has good things in it, I'm not saying it doesn't, but that some of its doctrines about itself were developed over time for basically political reasons, and it's taught some false things. That explains the evidence in a much more natural, parsimonious way. And at some point, I think you got to be like, yeah, all right. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
So that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Proof against Roman Catholicism. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. There's some general statements. Bruh moment. Such a bruh moment.
We're going to turn now to some Q&A. If you have a question for Dr. Dustin Crummett on anything related to what he just said, then leave it in the live chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. That was actually almost exactly 30 minutes, so that was really good on time there.
So I don't. Cam, I love you, but where's but math much? Like, I'm looking at the timing, and it's not even 27 minutes yet. I don't know how that's almost exactly 30 minutes. This is Protestantism, guys. Protestantism does this to your brain, everyone. Love you, Cam.
that really interested me was because I haven't really thought about the ethical concerns yet, and there's got to be others that you just haven't mentioned, right? You mentioned the one about burning heretics and stuff, and that just seems
You barely mentioned them at all.
pretty problematic.
Oh no, guys, it's problematic, guys. Oh no, the official teaching of the church that has a greater understanding of the truth of God, who we're supposed to submit to in order to discern the truth of God and put away our private interpretation. Oh no, it says something problematic. It's not like I have to put away my intuitions or anything and just submit to what God says through his church. Oh no. Oh dear. Oh no.
For lots of reasons. I just can't like it. I can't even comprehend the church's, if that is the church's stance. Like it's okay, but it's just something that we don't do anymore. Like I can't even.
Yeah, the circumstances, bro.
comprehend that is
I mean,
something
I
that
think
people
I think I can
accept
give
now.
an easy explanation for that, right? I think the explanation is in the Middle Ages, the church did this and it was a wrong thing to do, but of course they said that it was the right thing to do, and now you're sort of stuck with that because you can't change the teaching because it's mentioned in church councils and things and papal bulls. And so, but you don't actually burn people anymore. That seems bad. And so you say, well, okay, we don't do that anymore. And that's how
No
you
examples, no evidence.
changing the teaching, and you don't have to burn people anymore. But you still have this theoretical problem of saying that you have the right to tell the state to do that. And in fact, you can depose a Catholic king if he refuses to do that. And
Yeah, based.
are very problematic.
What are you, a status?
And to Kevin's, he's the one who really did all the research into this. But
Whoa, hang on. I need
So-
to go back. Hang on. Who did all the research on this?
he's the one who are very problematic to my mind. And to Kevin's, he's the one who very problematic to my mind. And to Kevin's, he's the one who really did all the research.
Who did he mention?
But-
Kevin's?
So before we move to questions, let me just do. I'll let the audience know really quickly. So at the one of the first links that you're going to see in the description of this video, there's 2 free resources, and one of them was actually co-authored by Dustin Crummett.
Uber cringe. I'm kidding. Unironically, I'm sure this is some helpful stuff. Lovely to see you as usual. Late. I think I've missed pretty much the whole stream. What is in your head, the other Paul? I don't know. The other Paul, that cringe Protestant you're talking about. Yeah, I'm actually the other Peter. This is my mitre. Because I'm a papist and I'm arguing against a Protestant presentation in this stream. The other Paul, he is nowhere to be seen here. He is not here. It's just me, my good old papist self right here. Hang on, let me straighten this up a little bit more. I'm just like I'm oh dude, this is great. This thing's actually great. Hang on, let's get it all nice and straight. Straight as it can be, at least. Good enough. Like, this is me, the other Peter. Right here. I am the bishop here. Like that. That's right. I'm infallible, boys and girls. I'm like so great. Honestly, Crummett sounds like he is deep in the Dunning-Kruger. I don't think that. After reading an anti-RC book by Jimmy Swaggart, I don't think so. No. Just because someone gives a very simplistic and easily refutable presentation doesn't mean they're Dunning-Kruger. I think Crummett is just like he's just stepping into this and just giving this kind of basic crash course in what he thinks his scholarly consensus is a slam dunk. But he just really doesn't know the field. He just doesn't know what's happening with it. So I'm sure if he learned, he could give some more nuanced stuff. But just with this presentation, it's just not good. The other Paul's burned at the stake by the other Peter. Not true. The other Paul is unfortunately still out there in the wild, committing all his heresies and that. I can every now and then hijack his channel, but he can eventually gain control back of it. So, yeah, that's kind of how this is happening. I might look at a couple of Q&A things just to kind of see how Crummett deals with these certain issues. So let's go right here and let's take a look at his first question from Maverick Christian.
Sorry, I'm just formatting everything so I can get it up on the screen here. All right, Maverick Christian. He says, what of the objection that Luke 1:34 indicates perpetual virginity of Mary because it uses the continuous
Yes, absolutely.
puzzle?
So true. Amen.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, so what he's talking about.
Notice how long he takes to respond to that. Clearly, he's been confounded.
This is during the Annunciation. So the angel shows up to Mary and says, you're going to become pregnant. And she says, how can this be when I am a virgin? And the thought is that must be indicating that she has like taken a vow of perpetual celibacy because she's confused about how she could become pregnant.
Yeah, actually, so true.
Yeah, I don't think that makes much sense, because it seems like the clear implication of what the angel said.
I found just as an aside, I found the hotkey for different things in StreamYard. So I do Control D for muting, so I don't have to manually click all the time anymore. So nice and easy without having to move the mouse. So anyway, let's go back 1 second.
Much sense, because it seems like the clear implication of what the angel says is that like she's going to become pregnant, in the near future. Like nothing else has to happen, right? In the same way that, I mean, if somebody, like if your wife comes to you and says, I'm going to have a baby, you're not going to be like, oh yeah, I figured that we were going to have a baby at some point. You think that means that like immediately in the near future, she's going to have a baby. And I think that that's why Mary is confused, is because that's the implication of what the angel says. And that's, I mean, if Luke was trying to convey that she had taken a vow of perpetual virginity, there would be much, much easier ways and much clearer ways to say that, I mean,
and that's, oh dear. That's that's a classic exegetical fallacy where, and this is both the other Peter and then ironically me saying this as well. Oh, the author could have said this clearer. If the author wanted to say X, he could have said it clearer. Therefore, he's not saying X. That's just silly. That's just silly. That's not a good hermeneutical thing. Anyway, back to the other Peter. He doesn't respond at all to the fact that it's why would Mary be confused at all? Like, no, she should just expect, oh, I'm going to have marital relations with Joseph. That's how I'm going to have this child. Makes best sense. Really only makes sense on the idea that she was vowing to be a perpetual virgin as service to God. So yeah, doesn't refute that at all.
She could say that explicitly. Luke could say it in the narration. Doing it through this way, that's very easily explained just through conversational implicatures and stuff. I don't think how he would do that in more explicit way.
We have quite a number of people commenting. So here's the next one from Phoenix Baker. Thanks for your super chat, Phoenix. He or she says, aren't all similar arguments that Dustin brings brought against all types of Christianity, slavery and burning?
And here's where the liberalism comes out, boys
historicity
and girls.
etc.
Yeah, so I mean, my inclination, maybe I'll lose some people here, I don't know. My inclination is to agree with somebody like Randall Rouser, a lot of the early church fathers, actually, that some of these ethically problematic things in the Old Testament shouldn't be read at face value. Either they're mistakes, or they're allegorical, or they should be read in some much more complicated way. People can read Randall's recent book about this.
And
you find in the church fathers, for instance, talking about all these wars where the Israelites go in and kill all these people. And he says, like, look, if these were just stories about wars where the Israelites kill a bunch of people, the apostles would have never handed them down to us, right? Clearly, this is some sort of spiritual allegory. Gregory of Nyssa, I think it's Gregory of Nyssa, talks about the story of God killing all the firstborn children in Egypt. And he says, that doesn't make any sense. It's like the kids didn't do anything. Why would God kill them? This makes
perfect sense. Nyssa was wrong.
An allegory about cutting sin off at the source or something like that. I'm not saying that they're
perfect example of just like, oh, according to my preconceived moral system, this doesn't make sense. Therefore, it must be read in this other way, rather than allowing the text as it presents itself and the words of God through that to affect your views.
Exact allegorical method was right. I'm just saying, I agree with Randall and the church fathers and a lot of people that, yeah, there are similar arguments against some of the stuff, particularly in the Old Testament. And I think those arguments are good there too. I don't think that God really did command people to commit genocide and that sort of stuff. When it comes to historicity, I think you just have to look at how good the historical argument is. I mean,
impeccable.
In some cases, I think the argument actually favors what the Christians are saying. The evidence for the resurrection is pretty good. And then the question just becomes, is it good enough to justify belief in a miracle or something? So, you have to take those sorts of things on a case-by-case basis, I guess.
So Maverick Christian actually had a follow-up to his super chat, if you don't mind taking this one. He said he wasn't really impressed with your response. He said not the best response by Crummett, in my opinion. A better objection would be to explain that the continuous present doesn't necessarily mean forever and ever, if that's true.
True, but it more likely means in this context.
Yeah, I guess he must. I mean, he's using the continuous present to refer to some sort of grammatical thing that I'm not up on, I guess. Maybe he can explain what he means by that in the chat or something, and you can tell me.
Okay, yeah. So Wade, if you have a follow-up, then just let us know there. Okay, so one more super chat here from Jamie Russell, Christian Middle Earth. He says, what does Dr. Crummett make of the history of identification of the papacy and prophecy among the reformers?
I'm not sure what he means by that.
I presume like the beast of Revelation and all that jazz.
You do find
Cringe.
in early Protestant churches lots of confessions where they think that the Pope is the Antichrist and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that, so I guess I disagree.
Boring. Skipping on.
But
Skipping
maybe that's
ahead.
not what he's talking about.
Several or two questions here. One, do you think that Thomistic
Boring.
Difference in the cause in order to have a difference in the effect, and if.
And this one's from Ren Lamo.
Here's the best question, guys. Here's the best question where something is mentioned.
Ren Lamo? Sorry, I'm probably butchering this. He just says, hi, Cam, why not set up a Protestant versus Catholic debate? Yeah, so I'm actually working on one. I mentioned this in the live chat. I'm working on a debate with Jimmy Aiken and a guy named The Other Paul, I think is his name on YouTube. So I'm working on setting up a debate between them.
Hat off. Let's go. Plugging me on capturing Christianity. Let's go. Anyway, hat back on. Yeah, that dumb Other Paul, Jimmy Aiken's going to absolutely thwomp that guy. Jimmy Aiken is like literally the patron saint of apologetics. The Other Paul's going to get absolutely annihilated by Aiken. So good. I can't wait for that to happen. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be absolutely amazing when Paul gets utterly destroyed and the other Peter, will just dance on top of his grave after he... Okay, that's a bit dark. I won't go there, but yes. The other Philip, hey, Paul, it's good to hear that canonical, infallible Aussie accent. Well, thank you very much, but Paul's not here right now. This is the other Peter. Yes, with the infallible Australian accent as well. But otherwise, that dirty heretic, the other Paul, he is not here right now. I've temporarily hijacked his channel in order to dunk on this libtard Protestant. And yeah, that's what's happening today. Clipped, so true. Get that clip. Pope is the Antichrist. Your mum is the Antichrist, Pog. flipping got him. Submit to the Pope. If you believe that the Pope is Lord and then he died and rose from again, you will be saved. Facts. That's actually what Paul says in Romans.
We're just working on particulars right now, topic basically. So, and then we'll work on scheduling. So,
unironically, I've had like one or two emails back and forth with Cam about this. He asked me, hey, would you, after Dr. Gavin Lawton introduced me to him, he said, hey, Paul, would you be interested for a discussion with someone like Jimmy Aiken? I said, yeah, sure. And that was that. I responded a bit after I heard this on the stream. Hey, what topics would you like me and Jimmy Aiken? What kinds of topics would you like me or Jimmy Aiken to debate on? Just give a list of topics and all that. And that was a few days ago, and he still has not replied, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm just kind of waiting for him on his end. I assume he's pretty busy, but I hope he does get back. So yeah,
hopefully in the works. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So this one's from Angelica. This one just came in. Thanks for your super chat, Cameron. Just supporting your journey to Catholicism. God bless.
Amen. Base.
Yeah,
amen.
I would love
come to Rome, baby.
Love to be Catholic. I would love it.
Oh, let's go.
But then I, hear cases like Dr. Dustin Crummett, and I'm like, I don't know. There is a whole lot.
Libtard keeping him from Rome.
So I've been doing what I can to.
Unironically, though, so taking the hat off again, unironically, that was really bizarre to hear. Like, he wants to become Catholic. That kind of sucks. Okay. But he's kept back by considerations of argument, evidence, and all, which is good, which is very good. But he includes Dr. Crummett's one in one of those. And I'm like, Cam, you've been like really exposed to much more high level argumentation by Protestants and Roman Catholics and all that. Like, is Crummett's presentation really a factor that you think is significant in keeping you from Rome? Like, that His presentation's weak. It genuinely is very, very weak. Maybe Cam is kind of filling in Crummett's presentation with what he already knows about the specifics of the primary source data and the reasoning and more advanced arguments. And so Crummett's presentation is just kind of reminding him of those things that already exist rather than presenting it as an argument in and of itself. Maybe that's kind of what's happening, but otherwise Crummett's presentation is very, very poor. It's if that's really a factor in keeping you from Rome, oh dear. The other Philip, since it's the other Peter instead of Paul, now I know why the infallibility was so obvious. Of course, Philip, of course. And clearly, by the way, of course, since I am superior and supreme above you and the other boys in the Apostolic College, I'm going to have to ask you to, by my power as the supreme Peter established by Christ himself. I mean, you were there with me, mate. He did make me the Pope, clearly. I'm going to ask you that by my ultimate Petrine power that you make me a sandwich and email it to me, please. So yeah, please do that as soon as you can. Make it snappy. Him wanting to become Catholic so genuinely sets him up for lots of confirmation bias. It does. Unironically, yes, it does. It does. Really, really does. Which is why I've been so insistent of wanting to reach out with Cam. And so massive props to Dr. Gavin Orland for putting us in contact. It was super, super cool of him to do that. IDK, why people want to push Cameron or anyone to Catholicism. The reality is you don't need to be Catholic to be saved. So hat off. It is a complicated thing. Here's the thing. It's like they will argue that Vatican II doesn't just say any and all Prots can be saved, just that it's not impossible for a Protestant to be saved, but it's very unlikely. And even if that's the case, the Roman Catholic Church is the fullness of the faith, and they want to, out of charity, to bring people to the fullness of the faith. So that's what they say. Converting someone to your group gives self-validation. I mean, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
To subject my feelings, that is a feeling that I have. It's a real one that I want to become Catholic. I would love to.
So true. But succumb to your feelings, Cam. Those are true good feelings.
Critical thinking and scrutiny.
Cam, feel that burning in your bosom and come to Rome. Submit to Papa.
So I think it's important.
Yeah, I think, Cameron, if I were you, that I might invest, and I think you're planning to do this anyway, I would probably investigate some other liturgical traditions, Anglicanism and Eastern Orthodoxy and stuff.
Find the Latin Mass, the Mass that Christ himself gave to the apostles.
What you've said before, it seems like there's something in that speaks to you, but then my opinion is that some of these other traditions don't have some of the same intellectual problems that Catholicism does, or they're not as serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that I need to look into as well. So, okay, so from Mango Bango, we'll get to as many of these as we can. They're starting to roll in now. So,
boom, so
Saint
true.
Theodore, Eastern Father.
Yep, another Eastern Father. There we go.
To Pope Leo III said, "Therefore, save us, O most divine head of heads, chief shepherd of the Church of Heaven." So
true.
Thoughts?
Eastern Father, get dunked on Crummett.
I believe that he said that. I'll say that. I mean, I don't know all of the context of every quote that somebody can throw out just off the top of my head. I'll say that the overwhelming consensus of impartial historians,
impartial scholar. No such thing as an impartial historian. That's cringe. That's cringe. Everyone has epistemic presuppositions, even if they're not necessarily religious in nature. This does genuinely show the point how he just appeals to scholarship over the primary sources themselves. He's confounded here with a primary source. He doesn't know what it's about. He hasn't seen it, which does at minimum force Crummett to qualify his statement that the Eastern Fathers rejected the papacy. If he doesn't deal with the quote itself. But again, Eastern Orthodoxy, they also affirm that Peter and the Bishop of Rome was the head of the church in some sense, just not the same degree as Vatican I. Anyway, all in all, Crummett, way too simplistic of a presentation. Way too simplistic.
That the early Eastern Church did not recognize the supremacy of the Pope. And so that's all I have to say about that. I would need to look more into the context of that quote and what was said and what was going on with that guy and stuff to have anything more to say about
Yeah. Okay. So he has got a follow up here, Mango. He says, follow up since you said the East didn't recognize the papacy.
Yeah, and I again, I
Not
think
true.
what I said is the consensus of historians. And, again, people can read. I mean, Gavin Ortland has done a lot of good popular work that's available for free. People can also.
Unironically, yes.
Eamon Duffy has a book on the history of the papacy, and he's a very prominent Catholic historian who believes that the papacy was divinely instituted, but he doesn't think that it was instituted, fully formed by Jesus and recognized by everybody and stuff. So,
hey, get some Newman, slap some Newman on it. We're all for that, man.
Because I'm not going to know. I mean, there's so much literature. I'm not going to know every quote off the top.
Oh man, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so from Nathaniel Bennett, he says, just for
I think I'll call that it for now with responding to it. So we responded to the main presentation itself. We very clearly refuted it from a Romanist perspective. There's such easy responses that I think even lay Catholics who just casually watch Catholic Answers, they can very easily come with responses to what Crummett there says. I didn't even give the most advanced Roman Catholic takes in response. It was just basic stuff in response to what he claims. It's what else can we? I mean, what else can I say? What else can I really say? He doesn't. It's unfortunate. It's a telltale sorry story. Now that I take the hat off now, and I put it over here. So now, thank you, other Peter, for your cringe heretical Romanist apologetics on my channel, and now I, the other Paul, have returned. But unironically, I hope this is a good story, a good demonstration of how you got to really know the field you're getting into when you're arguing. Clearly, Crummett's new to this. I think he doesn't really get the state of the playing field, and so he could. It's advice for anyone, whether it's on this topic or on any other thing you want to argue about. Know where you're getting into. Know the state of the playing field when you're getting into it. And also don't appeal to just, must scholars say this, must scholars say that, because as we can just see, just from that one super chat, the guy who gave a quote from an Eastern father, very likely, in my opinion, out of context, given the frequency of that. But it confounded Crummett. He couldn't respond to it because he hadn't seen it. And he just defaulted, the scholarly consensus is this. So it just takes someone who has a handle on primary sources to absolutely demolish you, even if you genuinely do have the backing of scholarship on your side. If you don't know the sources yourself, you're going to be absolutely humiliated, and rightly so, because the argument is about the evidence itself. It's not about what a bunch of people with certain degrees say about the evidence. It's about what the evidence actually says. And anyone with requisite learning can get into that, even if they don't have degrees. So yeah, that's very, very good way to do it. Don't do generalizations. Don't just say, the Eastern Fathers say this. The guys say that. Blah, blah, blah. Don't just make hasty generalizations like that. Don't just say, we'll expect this to happen. Blah, 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 blah. Give reasons. Why is this the case? Why is the silence significant? For example, why is it significant that the papacy is not mentioned in the New Testament? I can come up with reasons for why the ubiquitous silence across the New Testament and certain early church fathers is highly significant for issues like Marian dogmas and for the papacy, but they actually have reasons behind them. Not just the fact that they're just, we'd expect them to say that. I can give very nuanced and good reasons for why that's the case that I think could cumulatively become a compelling argument. It's not going to be like how Crummett did it, though. I'm not just going to say, we expect it, and scholars say so, and then that's about it. Jace, watching this stream felt like a kid trying to play sport with professional athletes. He was lost in the source. So true. So true. Man. Yet you are lost without the source. I don't know. What are we talking about here? The source. What's the source that we're talking about here? Are we talking as in like primary sources in that? Or I don't know. I don't know what you guys are mentioning. But yeah, moral of the story. I hope to fellow prots who are listening that this is a good lesson in how not to argue on these issues. And I guess now I'll get into a brief. I can't be here for too long because I've got to head off with my mum to do something soon. So let's have a brief Q&A. So once again, Q&A messages from financial supporters and from super chats take priority. I'll give it a minute for any supporters who want to give their questions. There's not a whole ton of people here in the live chat, so supporters, feel free to post your questions either in the supporter questions section on the Discord server or just right here, and I'll know who you are and I'll be able to prioritize you. Otherwise, anyone else can give their questions as well. It doesn't look like a massive live chat today. Nice viewership as usual, but it doesn't look too massive, so I presume I'll be able to get to free questions as well. Yes, you guys get right on that. You know, I will really quickly. What's my phone charge at? Okay, I need to charge my phone. Put that on right here. You guys just get your questions in. Hang on. Hang on. Okay, you guys get your questions in, and I will. Yes, thank you, Matt. You guys get your questions in. I'll be 30 seconds. I need to get water. All right. Questions. Let's take a look at what we got here. Okay. From one of my higher tier supporters, the other Philip. So when are you going to come home? Home to Rome. So unironically, I'm already home because I have the gospel. Boom. Roasted. Destroyed. Okay. No other supporter questions or super chats. So Pog. Going into apologetics against RCs can become a monumental learning experience due to the massive background knowledge of church history required. What would you suggest to a layman who is interested in this field? First and foremost, go into the field. This is how I did it and why I think I do it very well compared to many other apologists. Don't go into apologetics primarily. Go into the fields themselves first outside of an apologetics perspective. So, for example, you want to get into apologetics with Roman Catholics and all that stuff about, let's say, the papacy, right? And so the field that regards early church history. Go study early church history in itself outside of the apologetics context. If you want, look for particular sources that do pertain to the papacy and all that stuff. But otherwise, just study the relevant topic itself outside of an apologetic context first. And then once you have a good knowledge on the topic, then you can get into apologetics. Now, this is just me presuming that the evidence does support and prefer a non-Romanist position, right? But ultimately, in the end, you've got to let the evidence lead where it goes. If I was to find that the evidence preferred Romanism, I'd go there, and then I would get into apologetics after that against Protestants and all that, for example. So first, sort out the truth in itself, determine the truth in itself first through studying the field, and then once you've come to a solid grasp of what it is, if you're a committed Protestant in particular, then you can get into apologetics. Study church history first. It's hard to recommend stuff for it because there's no one resource, I guess, that you can go to. But I guess there's some good secondary sources I know of. There's History of the Church, I think, 5th edition. Church History in Plain Language. So I've heard good things about that. 5th edition recently came out. So Church History in Plain Language, 5th edition. Then there's also 2000 Years of Christ's Power, which I also hear very good things about. So those are some general secondary sources about it. Otherwise, significant primary sources would be the likes of early church historians, such as Eusebius of Caesarea, Sozomen, Theodoret, Socrates, Scholasticus. I actually personally put Irenaeus in the class of historian, because the classical sense of history, it wasn't just talking about past events. It was more general. It was inquiry. That's literally what the Greek term means. Historia. It means inquiry or investigation. And so the father of history himself, Herodotus, in the 5th or 6th century BC, I forget which one, I'm dumb. His histories wasn't just looking at past events. It was actually going to places and describing them as they are, their culture, their people, their religion, and then also talking about past events. So I would personally put Irenaeus of Lyon, his against heresies. I would classify that as a work of history as well, because he's investigating or demonstrating the view of Christians worldwide, discussing their material succession, talking about historic doctrine, the origins and rise and spread of various heresies. So I would genuinely class that. It's apologetic, sure, but I'd also class that as a work of history too. So that, those are key Christian historians as well. And then finally, it'll depend on the topic you go to. Just research online various Christian writers and church fathers and primary sources that discuss and pertain to the relevant topic you want to look at. And so you can find that in apologetics posts and videos by Roman Catholics and Protestants alike. Find the sources there, and don't just rely on what they say about the sources. Find the source yourself. Some good examples of free online places to find sources would include earlychristianwritings.com. They're pretty good. They provide numerous translations of many early Christian works, including some heretical ones too. But there's also New Advent, which is normally good, but as I showed in Tony Costa's stream, at least one section, it cuts out a very key sentence that contextualizes a common papal proof text. So be careful of New Advent. Otherwise, I'd recommend getting good latest scholarly editions of works and that. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's helpful for you, Pog. There is much more I can do. Ultimately, my answer to that question is just everything I do here on my channel. My ultimate thing is to be an example that people can follow and emulate in terms of good historical investigation, apologetics, all that jazz. So just see what I do in my material against Romanism, Orthodoxy, and that. See why it works, why I do things, and try to emulate that. That's what I recommend generally. I hope that's helpful. Maybe I'll make that a tutoring course in the future one day. Maybe I will actually make that something for 1 second, getting a call. Like this video, I love you, mum. But yeah, I might actually do that. I might actually because I do want to have a good number of topics to do tutoring stuff on that people can hire me for. And again, the latest coming Apostolos supporter tier, they'll get 3 free hours of tutoring for whatever they want every month. And I think I might actually do a Protestant apologetics course as well. That'd be really cool, I think, actually. I think that'd be very, very helpful for people. The selling point of it is not, because ultimately I want to make my content virtually entirely free. I don't want to put any content behind a paywall. The unique thing about tutoring is the fact that you're going through content, through things with me personally. That'd be the unique selling point of tutoring. Otherwise, though, I don't want to put content behind a paywall. Joshua Tanis, fellow Anglican here. How's the split from heresy going in Down Under? It is going beautifully, honestly. We've just, like with the new Diocese of the Southern Cross, for anyone who doesn't know, the GAFCON, which is the Global Anglican Futures Conference, they're basically the gathering point of traditional dioceses within the Anglican Communion worldwide, standing against the liberals. And they just had their Australasia conference in August. My own ministers actually went to that. And apparently, in their own words, it was electric there, the atmosphere. And they announced in that conference, that they were opening a new diocese, the Diocese of the Southern Cross in Australia. that is going to be headed, that is now headed by, at least temporarily, by Archbishop Glenn Davies, who's the former Archbishop of Sydney, which is beautiful and makes perfect sense because Sydney Archdiocese is like the bastion of traditional Anglicanism in Australia that staves off the Liberals. And the point of this diocese, it's a non-geographic diocese where any Anglicans, clergy, I'm not sure about the specific thing, but parishes in terms of not like the property itself, but people, so clergy and congregations, if they're under the jurisdiction of a heretical bishop, they can choose to go under the wing of the Diocese of the Southern Cross so that they can have jurisdiction and faithfully keep their convictions and not face the wrath of a heretical bishop. So going very well, in my humble opinion, a very necessary split. And I just pray that eventually the liberal dioceses are so depleted, both by the general gradual loss of membership, but also the mass exodus of traditionalists, that eventually they just cease functioning altogether, and the traditionalists just take back the normal diocese one day, even if it's years down the line. I really pray that happens. Oregon's response to Celsus and the division between Christians has no reference to an authoritative institution. Does Oregon provide good evidence for the later development of a central church authority? I think it does. I think it really does. He gives a very detailed argument in response to Celsus's complaints about the things of Christians, and his response is fundamentally intellectual. Look, there's disagreement in the fields of medicine, in the field of philosophy. It doesn't mean those fields are wrong or that there's no right answers. It's just that people investigate and they come to different conclusions, some right, some wrong. That's it. Likewise with Christianity. Some people are honestly searching for the truth, and some greatly miss it, but that doesn't mean there isn't a truth or it can't be found. That's it. He doesn't give anything of a, well, it doesn't matter. We have official doctrine. There's people who stray from it. That doesn't affect anything. The fact that it doesn't say that, I think, is very, very, very curious. Okay. Thanks a bunch. No problem, Pog. Love ya. The other Philip, just come home, bro. Bro, just come home. Most RCs don't believe in transubstantiated anyway. Most Catholics don't care, bro. Just come home. Rome, sweet home. Oh, man. Matt, what main area or areas of Roman Catholicism would you focus on if you were being interviewed for proof against Catholicism? Ooh, that's a good question. So I make distinctions in the kind of evidence I'd use. There's inferential data, where you look at the evidence in history and it has a very strong probabilistic cumulative case against the papacy, for example, even if it wouldn't necessarily constitute a deductive logical proof. But then there could be others where you point to a contradiction in official teaching. I genuinely believe, for example, that Vatican II's ideas of the graces of baptism and salvation generally strictly contradict Florence. I do believe there's a genuine logical contradiction. So if I was being interviewed, I would kind of go that two-pronged approach, giving a cumulative case that becomes a functional proof, still probabilistic, but a probability so high that it does functionally become a proof against Romanism with the absence of their key claims. And then I'd also go for the logical proofs of just contradictions in teaching throughout history. I think that's not an area that's explored very much, nowhere near as much as it should be. So I think I eventually want to make content on that, which would, I think, be very helpful. Okay. A legit question, finally. Do you find apologetics with Roman Catholics fruitful? It seems so many are simply gaslit so badly they deny the possibility the church could be wrong. It's not all about them. That's the key thing. It's not all about just reaching the Roman Catholics. Fundamentally, it's about making these things public, making public arguments, so that even if your interlocutor is so entrenched they won't change, nonetheless, other people will watch, whether they're other Roman Catholics or if they're Protestants who are struggling with this stuff, and they'll see a Protestant who's going really, really, really well with this and very thoroughly responding to Romanist things, and they'll think, and if they had any worries, any temptations to go to Rome, that may just be dispelled in them. I personally know from experience these psychological effects, even if it's not purely rational, these psychological effects of seeing opponents to your beliefs gain the rhetorical upper hand in online discussion, even if they're not necessarily correct in what they say, just getting the rhetorical upper hand and at least seeming to give powerful arguments. The psychological effect in that can be very, very strong. I nearly apostatized because of that, basically, because of atheists and all that. And so it's a real thing. So just doing public arguments at all can really impact someone who's just silently watching on. That's why I do it. Even if it doesn't immediately reach the guy watching, it can impact the person watching. Sorry, if it doesn't even if it doesn't get the guy who I'm arguing with, it can impact the people who are watching. That's the important thing. I think it's more fruitful in keeping Protestants out than converting ICs away from Rome. That's it. It is more effective for keeping Protestants going to Rome. But otherwise, you can present apologetics in a way that does try to reach the Roman Catholic and get them out of it. I think that can still happen, and I think it should happen. I do like to present my stuff in a respectable enough manner where it will get the Roman Catholic to reconsider what they think. And the important thing, if you want to reach Roman Catholics, is you don't just leave them in the dark. You don't just refute Roman Catholicism and leave them in the dark. They'll get into some massive existential dread and like fall to atheism, for example. That very often happens. You should have the alternative there. Have a solid conception of a Protestant Christian faith there, ready to go to give to them. That's what I actually want to do with a couple of books I'm writing right now. Slow going, but it's happening. Where I won't just refute Romanism or Eastern Orthodoxy. I will give a good alternative of the Christian faith that they can follow for someone who may be convinced of my arguments. Thanks, Paul. You helped me write that question. Only appropriate you answer it for me. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, yeah, I think I do remember that. Yeah, that was ages ago on Discord. Yeah, I'm glad you can help that. Yeah, there you go. That is a very good way. That's why it was framed so well, because I did help you do that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, very true. The other Phil, that's so true about the gaslighting. Yeah. Both themselves being gaslit, but also gaslighting Protestants. I think that's unfortunately very, yeah. The audience opinions are the main goal of a debate, not the interlocutor. Exactly. Very, very true. Okay. Excuse me, stuff in my nose. I think that's about it for now. I've got to get ready to go out. This was pretty darn cool. This is a great presentation. It was a very good devil's advocate thing. Very good introduction of the other Peter here, who will be a recurring character in the future, among other characters I intend to have. I need to introduce Pierre. So Crusader guy, French Romanist guy, Pierre. I need to introduce him to videos eventually. I intend to get someone or just straight up myself, just speaking really angry French, and he just insults me all the time, Pierre. But otherwise, yes, the other Peter is here. Great introduction. He'll coming back in the future. If I feel like it, I may actually cut up this presentation into just the main meat responses by the other Peter, and then present more nuanced Protestant responses to those simple Roman Catholic arguments. So I actually might respond to the other Peter in a future stream. That'd be freaking hilarious. It'd be funny. It'd be even funnier than me responding to myself in the Great Schism doco. That'd be amazing. If you guys want me to do that, hound me in the Discord. If not, then don't. So yeah, it'd be pretty darn cool. Anyway, great answer. Good legal defense does not just attack the prosecution, but presents a possible alternative. Exactly. That's the end of it. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. This was super epic. Check links below to my channel, to my various pages, especially the new website. Subscribe by email if you want to get notified of new blog posts. I do have a few in the works right now. Become a financial supporter if you want to help me expand and grow this mission, help me make it into a job so that eventually one day I won't even need a side casual job for my personal income. I could just make this full time. That would be unreal. That would be epic. That's the ultimate goal. But otherwise, for those who are currently supporting me, thank you so much. You guys are absolute legends. So yeah, what do I have coming up soon? I'm hoping to do the Petrine office stream, second part of the early Roman episcopacy series. I'm just looking at my calendar over there. I'm hoping to do that as planned on the 27th, but I'm not sure if that's looking realistic anymore. It may end up being an early September thing, just because I've been so busy with many other things at once, and this is a very research-intensive topic. So I may be pushing that back. Otherwise, I may just replace that with a short video, and Christendom Weekly, of course, by the way. Episcopos and Patriarches tier supporters. Ecclesia in the Discord below. Suggest to me stories. Send me stories you want me to cover in the Christendom Weekly, breaking current stories in Christian world, and I will cover it. That is one of your benefits. Otherwise, I may just make a short video in the next few days and release that. But yeah, otherwise, lots of other cool stuff happening. Also, likewise, planning for the second part of the discussion between Father James and Reverend David Auld in early September. And I'm still working on the Beth Allison Barr book review, but I'm going to have to definitely push that well past the original date of the 31st of August. Yeah, so that's happening. Lots of stuff coming in the near future. Super epic stuff. Also, private Ecclesia stream tomorrow. Yes, so those who are Episcopos and Patriarchos supporters, private Ecclesia stream tomorrow, so you guys can see what I'm working on behind the scenes. Super epic stuff. Anyway, Matt, absolute legend of a mod. Thank you so much. Link tree right there with all the links. Also, on the website itself, I have a section on the website called links that has all my major links as well. So you can see them there in a very nice format on the main website too. Subscribe star. Yes, epic. Please support me. The Discord server, the official server, the Theocrat Lounge. Dr. Bob, I tuned in at the right time. Yes, the perfect time, just when I'm wrapping up. Otherwise, good to see you. Watch it through, mate. It's gonna be a very enjoyable time. You're gonna meet the other Peter in this stream once you watch it back. Anyway, people, thank you so much for watching. This has been the other Paul. I hope you have a lovely day or evening. God bless.